Welcome back to Pack Talk Podcast, episode number 70. I'm your host, Chad. I've got Chris, Lexy, Kevin with me today, Canine Revolution Dog Training, because today we're talking about dog training for dogs that are challenging. So recently we've gotten a lot of questions about, my dog won't take food, my dog's scared, my dog reacts, how do I handle that? So today we're going to be talking about dog training for challenging dogs. Just a general overview. Some of our prior podcast episodes cover some of the foundational work for working with challenging dogs, such as our remote collar episode and our learning theory episode, right? So we'll put those in the description down below so you can have an easy link to those, right? But today we're talking specifically about challenging dogs. But in order to do that, first we need to have an understanding of our dog training philosophy. And the way that we approach dog training is, at the simplest form, is we want to build up behaviors that we want from our dogs through rewarding the behaviors that we want and proper management. So we don't want to allow our dogs to do things that are going to be working against our goals, right? And we do want to reward behaviors that we like. Now, at first in our training progressions, we're going to be using lots and lots of rewards, and that's intentional, right? Because we're building up what we call a reinforcement history for those behaviors. Now, as time goes on, what we're going to be doing is reducing the amount of rewards, right? So we start off teaching with a lot of rewards, using a lot of rewards to build up behaviors. We're using management techniques to prevent the dog from performing undesired behaviors. As time goes on, we slowly start to pull the gas back on those rewards, so the dog is learning that yes, rewards will still come, just not as often. And we're going to pull those rewards back until they're completely randomized, meaning the dog doesn't know when they're going to get a reward or when they're not going to get a reward. We're going to use that for maintenance for those behaviors long term. As we dial back those rewards and the frequency of those rewards, we are going to start layering into our training progression accountability. And what this does for the dog is teach them that, hey, if we ask you to do something that you already know what to do, because we've spent all this time building up behaviors by rewarding them frequently and by managing properly, if we ask you to do one of these things and you don't do it, now there's going to be some sort of consequence, right? So we call that accountability, just like you or I might be held accountable for certain things that we know we're not supposed to do, right? If we decide to do them anyway, there might be consequences. So we start teaching accountability with a leash. We'll use a leash to apply a form of accountability that could be some form of leash pressure. It could be a leash correction, which in general is going to be a snap and release of the leash. And then later, we will layer over that remote collar. And we do train every single dog that goes through training with us. We condition them properly to the remote collar. And then it's up to the owner if they want to use that later or not. But if you go about the remote collar the wrong way, you can create a superstitious association, which is not good for the dog, right? And it's not good for the owner either and your goals. So we will complete the remote collar conditioning process, which properly teaches that dog about the remote collar in our standard training progression. And then after that, we have our rewards on randomized rewards. We have accountability, and then we're going to start generalizing and running scenarios with that dog to make every possible type of scenario very clear to that dog on how to behave, how to perform, like if they chase a cat, right? We're going to be helping that dog learn what to do in that scenario. Or if they used to react at people, right? We're going to be running scenarios around people to help them understand to not react at people. And then we're going to go into a maintenance phase, a maintenance plan of maintaining those behaviors long term. And that's basically our philosophy, right? Is rewarding, building up a foundation through rewards and proper management, layering into accountability. Then we generalize and scenario out a bunch of different scenarios, and we maintain that, right? That's the quick and easiest way I can explain that to you guys. Of course, there's a lot of different factors that go into that, and today we'll cover some of those factors, right? But let me step through just what we call our standard training progression. It's very similar to what we just talked about. But let's say I have a dog let's say it's a year old and I need to teach it things, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is focus on engagement with that dog, building up a relationship. And again, this is an ideal training progression, how to get from start to my goal with training with my dog, right? But things are not going to go ideal all the time. So again, you have to understand and remember that dog training is very, very dynamic. It's a very, it can be challenging area to work in, because dogs are they're living, breathing beings, so they're going to change day in and day out. They're going to have good days, they're going to have bad days, they're going to have days where it feels like you took a couple steps back in your training progression, right? But as long as you have an ideal training progression in your head while you're working with your dog, you can stay focused and on task and adjust as needed. So the first thing we want to focus on is engagement and relationship building. And the reason why we want to focus on that first is because, number one, a dog that doesn't want to pay attention to you is going to have a harder time learning what you want them to learn. If I want to pay attention to you, or if the dog wants to pay attention to you, then they're interested in the material that you're trying to teach them. This not just goes for dogs, it goes for people too, right? If you want to learn something, let's say you want to learn how to drive a Polaris, for example. I'm just saying that because it's right here in front of me. But let's say you want to learn how to unfold this table right here, right? You go to YouTube, you look up how to unfold a table, and you're good to go, right? You start learning from people about how to unfold a table. But if I'm on YouTube and a video about unfolding a table just pops up, I probably won't care about that because I don't want to learn that. So I'm trying to break it down, make it make sense. So I want engagement, I want relationship, because then the dog wants to learn what I'm trying to communicate to them, which helps me reach my goal with that dog. And the way that we establish engagement in an ideal sense is we're using food rewards, because we all need food, right, to survive, to sustain ourselves. So we use food rewards, take that natural need to intake food and use it to our advantage. So we put some criteria, and the first criteria is the dog just needs to look at us. Once they look at us, then they can access the food that we have. And we do that many, many times repetitiously until the dog is just ready to look at us, whether the food's there or not, right? That's what we call engagement. Sustained focus on the handler. The other way we can build up relationship is walking. So the walk is the bonding process, but you do have to be careful, because if you're walking and the dog's just pulling you all over the place, stuff like that, that's not necessarily going to be very bonding. You're going to be very aggravated yourself as a handler with a dog pulling on a leash. So what we do in general is we'll walk like a big circle, right turning circle, or a big oval, or a big square or rectangle, right? We just imagine that is on the ground, and we walk that, and we'll reward the dog whenever they're next to us, right? The dog can depart from our side, go sniff something, but if they come back in and check in with our side, we reward them right along our side with the food rewards. And the reason for that is we're still building up reinforcement history of that dog being next to us. It's going to help us with our engagement work, and it's going to be more of a bonding experience because the dog's constantly checking in with us. The dog's getting used to walking next to us instead of just pulling on the leash, right? So that would be an ideal way that we teach engagement and relationship building. The other way you build relationship is by, managing the dog's time, right? So if the dog comes outside of their kennel, right, they're with you, right? They're not running around doing whatever, chewing your carpet, chewing a toy in your living room or whatever. They come out of the kennel, they're with you. Once you establish that relationship, right, then they can go back to just kind of hanging out around the house, doing different stuff, chewing different things. But until you get to that point, you do need to make sure that you manage your time to help you build up the relationship. Once we have engagement and relationship established, then we go to our next phase of our training progression, our ideal training progression, which is going to be building up obedience behaviors through luring and rewarding with food. And again, we consider this still foundational level of training. So we have engagement from the dog, we have some sort of relationship with them. Those things are going to constantly be continuing to be built throughout this process. But now the dog's ready to learn things, so we start teaching them obedience behaviors with food lures. And the reason why we do it that way, because again, the dog likes food, right? the dog wants that food, we have that engagement. So we have food in our hand. They come up to our hand with their nose. They're sniffing our hand. They're like, oh, there's food in there. I want that. Then we use our hand to maneuver them around, manipulate them around into different positions. And we reward them whenever they're starting to move into those positions. And in general, we're going to be teaching how to heel, which is walking next to you on your left side for us, how to sit, how to down, how to stay, how to come on command, and then how to do like a spot command or a place command, which is go to a designated area, lay down, stay there, and going in and out of doors, things like that in a controlled fashion. We're doing all that just as muscle memory with food lures, which means every time we do these things, we're luring the dog into those positions or partially into those positions, because some dogs might struggle going down all the way, for example. So we might reward them for going halfway down, right? We might reward them for going 3/4 of the way down, and just build up over time the muscle memory of those complete positions. Once we have that established, that muscle memory, that looks like we're luring and the dog is very fluidly moving in and out of every position that we're luring them into. Once we have that established, then we'll assign a command or a cue to that muscle memory behavior. So let's just take a sit, for example. If I've been luring a dog into a sit, they're very comfortable with that, they're very fluid with that, I'll just basically start saying the word sit before I lure them into that position. That way we're going to classically condition them to do that sit position. And we'll do that repetitiously, many sessions for everything we're trying to teach the dog. And then we'll start to fade away the lure, which means we slowly stop luring so much and the dog is still sitting, still performing those behaviors. Then we layer into our accountability, like we already talked about, where we're going to be teaching them, hey, if we ask you to sit and you don't sit, that might be followed up with a leash correction. We might say no, tug and release on the leash. The dog then sits at that point because they're very familiar with all foundation of the sit command. They're familiar with the sit behavior, and then we reward them for that. And then we'll layer into accountability with the remote collar, which means we're going to condition them with the remote collar so they understand, what the remote collar is, what it means, what that sensation means. And then after that, we'll focus on socialization work, taking them out to different places, helping them to have a good, positive experience in different places. We'll use engagement for that, rewarding them for eye contact, and then we'll basically generalize everything by just taking them out, making sure they can perform all behaviors in all scenarios possible, using both random rewards and corrections and accountability to shape and continually build up all these behaviors. And then we basically go into a maintenance phase where then we just maintain this on a daily basis. We hand that over to the dog owner, teach them how to maintain it, go through any type of troubleshooting, anything like that, right? So that would be what I call an ideal training progression. But there's some factors we're going to get into that you might have to think about to adjust your overall training progression. But before I go into that, I do want to get some feedback from the trainers on ideal training progression. Is there anything that I missed, anything that needs to be brought up in more detail about training in an ideal training progression with your average dog? It's not going to cause many problems as far as, hey, they're not taking food, hey, they're not super insecure, things like that.
I mean, I would just say to keep in mind, like, this is obviously a crash course. Every dog's different, as we've said on multiple episodes. Just because I might have 3 dogs that are all food motivated and willing to work and do engagement, but they still might progress at 3 different paces. You know what I mean? Some dogs learn things a lot quicker, and some take extra repetitions. So, like, working through an ideal training progression, you still have to kind of critically think and pay attention to, is the dog processing the information? Are they learning what I'm teaching them, or do I need to keep doing repetitions and things like that? Mm-hmm. So that's just something that I think about when I have a dog that's fitting what you're talking about, an ideal training progression. You're still kind of having to think outside of the box sometimes.
Yeah, and if you're working on, let's say you're working on socialization or generalization work, when you're out at a local park and you're trying to work on, like, let's just say you're working on a come command, and that dog is struggling. Now it's a new area. You might have to backtrack a little bit in your training progression, take a couple steps back at the park, rebuild some of that stuff there, and then build it back up, right? So as we progress through training progression from start to your goal, with your dog. There are going to be dogs and times where you do need to backtrack a little bit, revisit some material in that training progression, and then build it back up. So that's very important. Let's talk about challenging dogs. The first one that might be a challenge for a lot of people, and we get a lot of comments about this on social media, is my dog won't take food. My dog doesn't like the food I'm giving them. My dog won't eat even its mealtime food, even if I leave the bowl out all day. So we're talking about a dog that won't take food. Obviously, we just talked about our training philosophy and our ideal training progression. And in both of those cases, we talked about, hey, we're building up behaviors by rewarding, lots of rewards. Over time, those rewards will stop. But at the beginning, we're building up behaviors by rewarding. So if you have a dog that won't take food, obviously, you think, hey, I can't do that because my dog's not eating or not interested in food. So what we need to do in this case is first focus on trying to develop and build that dog's hunger or food drive so that we can use our ideal training progression. And it's going to depend on the dog. It's going to depend on the scenario. But I will say a lot of dogs at home with their owners in this case are probably playing their owners. They are playing a game, and they know that if they don't eat whatever food, they're going to access something else.
Better, usually.
Right. Or their food is not a high enough value state to them because it's always available. Your dog might not be eating food out of its food bowl because at the dinner table it's getting a bunch of food scraps, right? And this may be something you don't even know is happening. Maybe it's your kids giving the dog food scraps, right? Or maybe it's your husband. It's usually the husbands that are causing trouble giving the dog food scraps, right?
Truth.
So stuff like that can be happening. It does affect it. So that means we have to have management in place to make sure that we know what our dog's intake is. Also, if you let your dogs out in the backyard, maybe your neighbor's throwing food over the fence. Maybe you're on the walk, or maybe you have a dog walker, right, that comes by to walk your dog, and they're feeding the dog a bunch of liver treats and whatever, while they're walking the dog, right? And your dog won't eat its normal food because it's getting food other ways. So the first thing to do with a dog that won't take food is identify, hey, we need to develop the hunger and food drive, which means we need to implement management to do that. So the first thing I recommend for that is basically, if you're not handling your dog, if you're not doing stuff with your dog, if you're not having oversight with your dog, keep your dog in a kennel or in an X pen in your house, because you don't want it wandering around. You don't want it digging through the trash. You don't want the kids or the husband just giving it food scraps all the time. You don't want the neighbor throwing food over the fence. So you need to monitor and identify, do I know for a fact that there's no other way my dog is getting food or satisfaction, right? So keep it in the kennel unless you're working with it. Keep it in the X pen unless you're working with it. If you are working with it or you're having oversight on it, you need to make sure you're monitoring it constantly. And the other thing I would do, this is a challenge for you, the dog owner, because it's a little bit inconvenient at times, but it will pay off in the long run if you can activate the food drive. But feed your dog's food, like your mealtime food, your kibble, if you're feeding kibble, or your raw food, if you're feeding raw, or whatever you're giving your dog, feed it to your dog yourself. Don't just put a bowl down on the ground, right? Give it to your dog out of your hand. And the reason for that is we need to make a connection with our dog that food comes from us. And so we can do that by giving them their mealtime food out of our hand, especially if we're incorporating management techniques at the same time, like using a kennel if you're not working with your dog or watching your dog, right? So you would want to continue this for a period of time to truly identify and see if you can use this technique to kick start your dog's food drive. Are there any other thoughts on that scenario?
I think one thing that owners should even keep in mind too is that sometimes, owners get to the point where like, okay, my dog didn't eat their breakfast. Now they didn't eat their dinner whenever I'm doing this hand feeding. And it's like, you have to keep in mind that especially right at first, your dog's not used to that. They're used to getting the food the way that they want it or just set on the ground. So it is going to be an adjustment period. And it's, it's like you said, it's a game you're playing with your dog. They're going to see who's going to hold out longer. So like, even if a day goes by, your dog's not going to starve themselves. It's just keep with it until your dog is eventually taking food, because they're not going to let themselves die by not taking food from you. So just don't freak out if, the first couple of times not working for your dog. Just, put up the food. We're going to offer it by our hand next mealtime.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And I will say that ideally, we don't miss meals or anything like that, but the human body, I'm pretty sure, can go like 3 weeks without food. Yeah. The dog can go a number of days and weeks without food.
This is what they do in the wild, like a wolf, or like
Right.
when they make a kill, they eat and then they go a long time
Right.
without getting food again.
Right, exactly. So what Lexy brought up, your dog might not be eating the food at first. That's totally normal. Stick with it, be consistent with your protocol, with your management technique, and you should see that food drive start to kick in. The other thing you can do, if it's been like 3 or 4 days and you're concerned, your dog's not taking any food, I'm concerned. What you can do is change up the food you're trying to give your dog, but still it must come from your hand, right, directly to your dog. So what I've done in the past with the dog that I'm trying to kickstart food drive is I've gotten some steak, it's good for you, good for the dog. Got some steak, cooked it, browned it, and then basically fed that to the dog out of my hand. The dog was definitely interested in that. And then I mixed that with the kibble, and then I was able to transition the dog back to kibble out of my hand. You know what I'm saying? So that's just an idea that you could try, is if it's been a number of days, maybe you're concerned, maybe your dog's losing a little bit of weight that you can tell, which will happen, just like it will happen to you if you don't eat for a period of time. Use some other type of more enticing food to get your dog eating, and as soon as everything gets kick-started, as soon as that hunger drive kicks in, that dog's super interested in it, then you can start to go back to your normal feeding amounts, your normal food, but still out of your hand. And you're going to continue to feed out of your hand for a while, I would say for at least 3 weeks, just because that's going to really get that hunger drive going. It's going to really get that food drive into gear so you can build that engagement. Then you can start to teach what you want to teach your dog, because you've established that food drive, right? Something else you might need to do to help you establish food drive is instigate another drive in your dog, and that's prey drive. So some dogs just don't really care if you're just standing there or sitting there and you just hand them some food. Some dogs just don't care about that. But they do like to chase things. They do like to run around and have a good time. So by applying your management techniques, by not allowing them to do certain things without you, right? Let's say they're used to being out in your yard chasing things, but because you've applied management, they're not doing that. You're focused on trying to kickstart that food drive. Well, now you can have them chase you with food in your hand to entice them to eat the food by triggering their prey drive. That's the goal, right? So we're going to trigger their prey drive because we know they like to chase things, and then we'll use that prey drive to our advantage to kickstart the food drive. And what that looks like is I might be out in my yard with some food in my pocket. I've got some in my hand. I'm running around the backyard. The dog's kind of chasing me. And then I'll show them in my hand that I have food. A lot of times the dog will start just, oh, what's in there? Start eating it, just because now we're in prey drive. They're having a good time chasing me around. They decide to nibble the food. They're like, oh, food, good to go. And then they become interested in food. You know what I'm saying? So you can definitely use that to your advantage. And that's a technique that we use a lot. We'll often use prey drive to initiate hunger drive and food drive. We'll often use prey drive to make food work more enticing and exciting for the dog. And then later, we can reduce the amount of prey drive that we're using because we've already established the food drive. You know what I'm saying? So those are going to be your keys to success with a dog that won't take food, is proper management with the dog. Use a kennel when you're not working with your dog. Having your dog on a leash at all times, even in the house, is going to help. And then making sure that all food being offered to your dog is coming from your hand. Remember, you're at home with your dog. You're not on a timeline, right? So take your time, stick with that protocol, be consistent. Once that food drive is established, then you can begin the ideal training progression, because now the dog is interested in food. And if maybe the dog starts to lose interest in food, maybe you're giving the dog too much food. So reduce the amount of food you're giving the dog, or change up your food. If you're trying to use kibble, go back to using the steak or the hot dogs or whatever the dog's super interested in. Any other thoughts on dog not taking food, how to kickstart that hunger drive to get the ideal training progression going?
Pretty much covers it.
All All right, the next challenging dog case that we'll discuss is a highly insecure dog. Now, a highly insecure dog is a dog that's very nervous or scared of things, obviously, right? This kind of dog typically is going to have a very tucked tail. They're going to be hanging their head down. They're going to be very rigid. They might pace around a lot. They might hide in corners or underneath furniture. So that's the kind of things you're looking for with a highly insecure dog. And, because of that insecurity, the dog probably is going to be struggling with food drive as well, although sometimes not. Sometimes the dog will be comfortable with like one person in the family, but the other people, they're insecure. So again, very similar to the dog that won't take food, our first step, our focus is, number one, implementing management on that dog so it can't foster insecurity. Because if the dog is running away from things, hiding underneath things, hiding in a corner, these types of behaviors, if they're allowed to persist, that insecurity is still there, it's still fostering, it's still developing. However, if we're able to stop the dog from performing those behaviors through management, using a kennel when we're not with the dog, keeping the dog on a leash, keeping it with us, we're going to be able to try and put a brick wall up in that dog's mind about doing insecure things, continuing to practice insecurity. So that's our first thing. We want to manage the insecurity and not allow the dog to continue to practice insecure behaviors, because we want those behaviors to stop over time. Second thing is we want to focus on developing that food drive. And what we want with an insecure dog is if we're inside, the dog will take food from our hand. If we're in the backyard, the dog will take food from our hand. If we're in the front yard, the dog will take food from our hand. If we're on the sidewalk, if we're down at the community center in our apartment complex or neighborhood, we want the dog to take food from our hand in all these situations, which usually a highly insecure dog will not. They might take some food in your house, but as soon as you're in the front yard on the sidewalk, they stop taking food because they're so freaked out about everything around them. So your goal is, number one, you're applying management. Number two, you're trying to build up that dog's hunger drive and food drive in these different areas. Don't make it too complicated. Just stick with inside your house, in your backyard, in your front yard first. If you live in an apartment, focus on inside your apartment, right outside your apartment door, and usually there's like a little threshold area right outside your apartment door. Try to feed there, and then down like where you take your dog to go potty. And those are going to be the first things you focus on. Once you start getting that food drive to kick in and you're doing it the same way we just talked about, right, where all the food basically is just coming from your hand, you can try different types of food to entice your dog to kickstart that food drive. Usually an insecure dog is not going to be able to be triggered with prey drive, so that probably won't work. But you can try if you need to. But once you get that food drive established, then you're going to start the ideal training progression with your dog. And let's say the highly insecure dog is able to start the training progression, such as the muscle memory luring, in your apartment or inside your house. You'll just do it there, and then you'll build it up, and then you'll take it outside, right? So that's usually how you're going to handle that. But once you get that food drive established, you're going to be working through that ideal training progression. Now, there are some things you're going to need to modify in that training progression and focus on. And for an insecure dog, it's going to be socialization and what I call resocialization. Resocialization to me is like we have an older dog that's insecure, right? And now they've created bad associations to a lot of different things like people or cars or whatever. So I need to re-socialize that dog to these types of things, change their association to them. And so that's going to be your focus once you get through muscle memory for obedience, once you get through putting all that obedience on command and cue, and then you layer into accountability. Once you have those things done, then you're going to focus on that dog's exposure to as many different things as possible, as many different environments as possible, and helping that dog to be calm, confident, relaxed in those places, using the food drive that you have developed and build to increase that dog's desire to put eye contact on you in these different types of places, increase that dog's desire to maintain a stay behavior or a certain obedience position, in these different types of places and not to freak out about things that are going on around them. And that's going to take lots of repetition, lots of consistency. It can be super frustrating, right? But you need to, remain calm. I know it's easy to say, right? Simple, not easy, right? But remain as calm as possible. Understand that your dog is working through this stuff mentally. Understand that accountability is going to help you. So you need to reward your dog for maintaining a position. Let's say I'm out at a local park and there's just a lot going on. My dog's nervous or the insecurity is there. I'll put my dog in a downstay. If that dog thinks that it's okay to break a downstay because some random person walked by with a stroller and they're trying to run away from that person, that's a safety hazard for your dog, right? Because if your dog thinks that it's okay to break a downstay and just take off, run away, that dog's going to get injured, could get killed, if it crosses a street and a car's coming at the same time, stuff like that. So that dog needs to know that these things you're asking them to do and doing with them, like a downstay, are for your dog's own safety, right? So that's when your accountability is super important. You know what I'm saying? You ask your dog to downstay, your dog's nervous because a stroller's walking by, so they get up, they try to move away. You need to make sure you say no, give them a correction and put them back into that position and reward them for staying there, because in the long term, we're concerned about our dog's safety, health, and well-being, and that's how we help them get there. You know what I'm saying? Now, if you're out in a park, if you're out doing socialization work and this person with the stroller is walking by, your dog might not be taking food, although they were taking food right before this distraction came by. That's okay. Just let your dog hang out there, make sure they're doing that downstay, and repetition of exposure to these different environmental factors is going to help them continually develop a calm, confident, relaxed mindset and not be as concerned with things going on around them, right? So this is where really the balance in dog training comes in. This is really where a good, thorough understanding of classical conditioning and operant conditioning comes in to really help your dog, right? And again, that accountability is an important piece in helping your dog for safety in the long run, okay? Those are kind of the big points that I've thought of with a highly insecure dog. I'm sure I'm missing some stuff. What do you guys got going
I would just say something that comes to mind with a highly insecure dog. It can also be emotional from the human side of things. So you have to be able to control that, remain calm, patient. So like just by the body language that our dog may put on may make us feel a certain way, right? My dog's tail's tucked, their ears are back, their head's down, maybe they're shaking, right? That can make me feel bad. Like, hey, I feel bad for my dog. I want to comfort my dog. I want to pick him up and hold him and say, it's okay, buddy, right? When we could be reinforcing those things. So sometimes you have to keep in mind, like you said, the end goal, the bigger picture. Why am I doing what I'm doing, right? So that eventually they can calm down and those behaviors are going to be less prevalent. So just keep that in mind as you're going through this process. And then the second thing that I see a lot with when you get to that re-socialization phase, I think people jump to that quicker than they should and don't know when they should take that step back, right? So like if you're in that scenario that Chad's talking about where your dog's at a downstay, but your dog can't hold the downstay, there's too much going on, you're trying to correct them, they just can't function, right? Like it's too overwhelming. You have to go back. All these behaviors, like what we're talking about, has to be solidified before you get to that point. So a lot of times people try to rush to that re-socialization, even if they don't have solid obedience. Hey, I'll just take them out at the farmer's market, and now your dog's just pulling you on the leash. There's all sorts of craziness going on. They got anxiety, insecurity through the roof, and they're just reinforcing that stuff. So that's something that I would keep in mind with that.
Yeah, that brings up a good point called threshold. Mm-hmm. So if you're out at a distraction area, real quick, can you pull up the podcast number for the operant conditioning, classical conditioning, so I can tell the listener about that one? But if threshold basically is your distance to distraction. So if I'm out in with an insecure dog in an area, there's a lady with a stroller, and maybe I'm 10 feet away from that dog, or the stroller with my dog, and my dog's freaking out, probably what I need to do is increase my threshold, my distance to that stroller, or let's just say it's a stationary object like a trash can. You know what I'm saying?
Those things will get you now.
Yeah. So let's say it's a trash can. I'm 10 feet away. My dog's freaking out. You know, I'm applying accountability. I'm correcting it for breaking the downstay. It's a struggle. Dog's not taking food. first thing I'm going to do as a trainer, let me increase my distance from distraction. Let me increase my threshold. So I might go from 10 feet to 15 feet. At 15 feet, the dog is okay, not taking food, but it's better than it was at 10 feet. Let's say I increase that out to 20 feet, and at 20 feet, the dog is calm, the dog is comfortable, now the dog's taking food. So that tells me that 10 feet's way too close for now. 15 feet, okay, but still too close for now. 20 feet away from the trash can, my dog is overall comfortable. Now what I'll do over time through many sessions is work my distance down. I might go from 20 feet to 18 feet. 18 feet, my dog's still good to go, right? Okay, let me bump it down to 16 feet. 16 feet, my dog's good to go. I'll bump it down to 14 feet. 14 feet, my dog's on edge. Let me go out to 15 feet. 15 feet, I'm good to go now. So now let me go to 13 feet. And I'll just slowly work my way in till I'm right next to that trash can and there's no issue with it. You know what I'm saying?
27 is understanding how your dog learns, which is canine theory.
Yeah, episode Pack Talk Podcast, episode number 27, Understanding How Your Dog Learns, is going to take you through the whole classical conditioning, operant conditioning discussion, learning theory discussion, so you can deep dive into the science behind how your dog learns. But that threshold is going to be super important with an insecure dog, and with our next dog, we're going to talk about a reactive dog, because you want to build it up to where your dog's comfortable, and over time you reduce your distance to distraction so that your dog can be right next to whatever it is and there can be no issues, right? So that threshold is going to be to your benefit to focus on and understand. And there might be a day where you're 5 feet away from the trash can and you're good to go. The next time you come out to a trash can, you might be 5 feet, the dog's freaking out. So now you bump it back out to 10 feet, then you work your way back down. You know what I'm saying? So that's going to be to your advantage as well. One thing to note, if your dog's super insecure, one thing that can help sometimes is by doing what we call pre-game, pre-exhaust. So you exercise your dog, get them nice and energy balanced before you take them out to socialize them. That way they're not at the heightened state of energy. That way you got a little bit of pre-exhaustion mentally and physically with that dog. That way they're more open to being exposed to things without wanting to move away from them or freaking out, things like that. So pre-gaming, pre-exhaustion is going to be a good technique to use in some cases. Some dogs are so insecure that's not really going to phase them. So you're just going to have to really balance out your thresholds and things like that, right? Other thing is, when you're working with a highly insecure dog, just be ready. There's probably going to be people that are judging you, people that might be saying things to you if you're out in a public place, especially if your dog's in a downstay shaking, right? Or if you're giving your dog a correction for breaking a downstay, people might come up to you and say things to you. Be confident in what you're doing. Understand that that's your dog. You're trying to help that dog, right? And you can try to explain that to these people, but in the end, if they end up saying something to you, leave that area if you need to, or just do your thing and ignore them. You know what I'm saying? But people are going to come up to you. They're going to say things. Everyone thinks they know what they're doing, right? Everyone had a dog that did this or did that, but they don't have your dog. Every single dog is different, just like every single person is different, right? So be confident in what you know you're doing. And even if you don't know if this is helping you, let's say you're taking these steps and you're like, man, I don't know if this is working, just be consistent, just stick with it, and you will see it start to develop over time. You will see your dog start to be less insecure over time, right? These kind of things take time to change and modify and develop, the behavior modification piece of it. So anything I'm missing on insecure dog stuff before we move on?
I'll just jump on the human aspect, because like that person coming up to you, your dog's shaking, it's scared, it needs to be picked up, this, and that. Chris touched upon it. Basically, it's just like more blunt, just because I've recently dealt with this with some of my clients. Don't coddle this type of dog when they're displaying that. Whatever mindset they're in, you're going to reinforce. So if they're sitting there shaking and you pick them up and you hold them close and you start baby talking them, you're just basically letting them know it's okay to behave like that, right? So just reinforcing that mindset. I had it where I went with a client to the vet recently. The vet tech is sitting there holding the dog. The dog is shaking. She's petting it and talking to it. I asked her to stop. And the way she cut her eyes at me, she thought she knew more than I did. But we don't want to reinforce that mindset. I tried to explain it best I could. At the end of the day, she followed my wishes because it's, my client's dog and I'm directing the session. But just something to be cognizant of. Like, they may like to go in their kennel. They may like to go under a dresser. You may feel like you need to cover their kennel because that's the only way that they're comfortable. And you're just going to reinforce that mindset. So you have to really put that out of your mind and know that in the long term, what you're doing is helping them overcome it versus reinforcing it.
Yeah, constant exposure to a thing or constant exposure to a variable, being consistent with that's going to be your friend instead of like, oh, this isn't working today, let me try the next thing. Or this isn't working. If you constantly are changing the variables too often, no matter whether it's an insecure dog or a non-insecure dog or whatever, but if you're constantly changing variables, you're never going to let that one variable that you're trying to develop and change take hold, right? So make sure that you in your head, you have your protocols, you have your techniques, your structure down, how you want to do it. Let's say you're doing it just the way we're saying, or maybe you're listening to another dog trainer and they have a different method and you're trying their method. Just stick with one method for a while, one variable, and then after that time has taken on that, change one thing and see if it's going to help you, right? I wouldn't change variables more than like 4 days, right? Do a variable for like 4 days and then, maybe change something if you need to, you know what I'm saying? So good to go with that. All right, next modification to training progressions or a challenging case we might experience is a highly reactive dog. This dog could be reacting at people, could be reacting at other dogs, could be reacting at cats, could be reacting at whatever, right? But if it's exposed to whatever the trigger is, it wants to react. It's barking, lunging, all that kind of stuff. So what we need to do is first figure out what is the root cause of these reactions. Sometimes the root cause is like insecurity or anxiety, right? Sometimes it's some type of association that the dog has with that trigger, whatever that trigger is. So if we can identify what the root is, we'll do that. Let's say the root is actually insecurity. Well, good to go. Then we can focus on the insecurity piece of it. But in general, still going to follow the ideal training progression. So we're first going to focus on developing that dog's hunger and food drive. So if the dog is super reactive, I'm going to go somewhere neutral, low key, where the dog doesn't feel like it needs to react on anything. I'm going to build up the food drive. I'm going to build up the engagement. I'm going to build up the muscle memory of obedience. I'm going to build up the obedience behaviors, put them on cue. I'm going to teach the dog accountability, all these things in a neutral environment. Once I've got up to the point where the dog understands accountability for behavior, now I'm going to focus on taking it out, generalizing it, running scenarios with possible things that the dog reacts at. And again, just like we talked about with the highly insecure dog, your thresholds are going to be very important, right? You don't want to get too close to triggers, right? You want to, over time, build up getting closer and closer to triggers. Now, with a highly reactive dog, your eye contact is extremely powerful. It's going to be powerful with any dog, right? I want to do it with any dog, but with a highly reactive dog, it's super important. So you need to build it up, and you need to build up more eye contact over time. What I recommend is do the downstate eye contact drill. So you can go to our YouTube and look up what that drill looks like. But basically, you put your dog in a downstay. You're walking around your dog, and every time your dog looks at you, you say good. You walk up, you give it a piece of food as a reward. And then over time, you start to randomize the rewards. You basically are aloof to your dog, and your dog's still giving you eye contact, right? Once you've mastered the eye contact in a downstay, the downstay eye contact drill, then you focus on it while you're walking, while you're moving. And that's beneficial because you might be in a downstay sometimes. Let's say your dog was reactive at other dogs. Your dog's in a downstate, other dogs are walking by. Your dog just ignores those dogs, maintains eye contact on you. Or your dog learns to be aloof to things around it because of that eye contact helped it get to that place. Or you could be walking down the street, other dogs are walking by, your dog puts eye contact on you instead of looking at those dogs, right? Or reacting at those dogs. Or your dog becomes aloof to the other dogs because that eye contact drill over time has helped it just not really care about things that are going on around it, right? You've basically counter-conditioned the reactivity, and you basically want the dog to, in its head, if it's ever in conflict, if it doesn't ever know what to do, You want that dog just to put eyes on you, put eye contact on you. And so everything we're doing training-wise, we're trying to help our dog establish a mindset of how to make good decisions. If I'm in conflict, what decision do I make? If I used to react at dogs, maybe I don't like the way other dogs act or look or whatever, right? I'm in conflict mentally, so I'll just put eye contact on the boss, you know what I'm saying? Or my pack, or the guy or girl that I have this strong relationship with, right? So if I'm in conflict, I want to put eye contact on my owner, and that's going to avoid the reactive trigger, and it's going to build the habit to not be triggered over time, right? That's going to be your big time key to success with a highly reactive dog. And you're also going to balance that threshold out like I was talking about over time, reduce the threshold so that you can feel comfortable getting close to things without your dog reacting. But again, if your dog does react, you do need to hold it accountable for that, right? And the whole purpose of a correction, the whole purpose of accountability is to change behavior. So if the dog reacts, I correct that, the dog stops reacting, I've done one step closer to stopping the reactions long term, because that dog's learning that if it does react, it's getting held accountable for that. But if it doesn't react, or if it puts eyes on me, it's getting rewarded for that randomly, right? Which makes that more of a valuable behavior set for the dog. So that's the whole goal with that. Quick story, my dog used to be super reactive, my Doberman. He used to react at people and dogs because he was dominant. And I remember vividly, I was in this park one day, big open space. I'm just kind of hanging out with him. I was just training with him. And out of nowhere, 3 dogs came out of the woods, no owners anywhere. They started running right at us. And I'm like, oh, shit. You know what I'm saying?
Here we
like,
go.
Yeah, I'm like, this is about to be a scenario. So I told him to heel. And he was next to me. He was off leash because we were in a big open park area, just me and him. Now these 3 dogs are hustling at us. And I just started walking. And I had done everything we're talking about up to this point. And so he sees these dogs, so he just puts eyes right on me. We're walking. These dogs run right up to us. They're sniffing him all over. He's just locked onto me with his eyes. And I'm like, good boy, you know, thank God. And I'm like, you know, holy shit, what's going to happen here? These 3 dogs got bored, so they ran off, disappeared back into the woods. And I just said, you know, okay to my dog, which means he can get out of position, he can kind of sniff around, whatever. And I just started playing with him for a little bit, right, to reward him for the good behavior, right? So again, that's what happens when you build up eye contact, you build up relationship, you have this training progression. Your dog knows, right, if they step out of bounds, they're going to get held accountable, right? If they do what they're supposed to be doing, they make good decisions, good things happen, right? So that's the whole thing we want, is our dog to make good decisions, right? Anything I'm missing with highly reactive dog scenarios or information or things that could help people with highly reactive dogs?
I mean, just don't forget, this is also about trust, right? So it's not just about like, hey, check these boxes and we're going to be good to go, right? So we want to build the relationship with our dog. So if I'm working on dog reactivity, but I keep putting my dog in situations that I can't control or I can't manage environments. Dogs, I go to a farmer's market and dogs, I'm allowing other dogs to walk up and get in my dog's space. That's not going to set us up for success. It's going to make it harder for him to give me those eye contact, or give me that eye contact, right? Because now his trust in me is degrading because I'm not controlling the environment. So even when you're working on these things, always be in control of your environment. And in fact, like, let's say I've got my dog Vader, or I'm at a downstate, Kevin, you know, walks up with this out of control dog, comes up in my space, and I say, hey, back off. Like, hey, we're training, back off, right? He backs off. My dog's trust in me is gonna increase. Hey, I just looked at Dad. I paid attention to Dad. I got a reward because I didn't react, right? All the stuff Chad's talking about. And Dad made that dog that I was uncomfortable about, because my dog Vader, he's insecure, right? So Dad made that thing kind of go away. So now I'm giving him more reasons to just give me eye contact, focus on your downstay, focus on what you're supposed to be doing. I, as your pack leader, will take care of everything else. You know what I'm saying? So,
or if that person won't listen to you, you might have to go help them.
You might have to help them. You might have to go hands on. I don't know.
Right now, people are going to get offended. It's just work through it, you know, because your dog and what's going on is more important than their feelings at that moment.
Sure.
You know, I've had people straight up just come up in the middle of a training session. You can tell that I'm working the client with the dog. Dog's not good to go. They come up, start sticking their hand out. I calmly but assertively tell them, hey, we're working through something, no interaction. and then they just sit there and stare at me like, I just crushed their whole world. But it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to have that element of control, because if you allow that to happen, if you allow that interaction while bad behavior is going on or a bad scenario happens, the relationship is going to just drop, right?
Yeah.
It's going to decrease. So your focus is your dog, your environment, and that positive experience, that level of control.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people struggle with that because you don't want to be mean, or you don't want to be mean to people. Which that was my issue. Like I'm a nice guy, and I don't want to tell people to screw off. You know what I'm saying?
I had to teach you to be mean.
Yeah, you did have to teach me to be a little bit mean, and sometimes like we have to teach our clients that same thing as well. But I mean I know for a fact like that was a factor in overcoming the issues of insecurity with Vader. Like I did allow times where dogs got too close or people got too close, and I was just I was not assertive enough to back that off. But it got to a point where I'm like, look, I put a lot of time, a lot of stuff into my dog, right, and developing our relationship. So like you have to stand your ground and do what's best for your dog, having the end goal in mind. I'm like, I don't know this person, I'm not going to see this person ever again, but I'm not going to let them ruin what I've been working on. So you have to control the environment. You have to.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about too is if you've got a highly reactive dog, for example, and you're working with them and someone's approaching you, or maybe it's a previous trigger for that dog and they're getting too close, or you're not being assertive enough in stopping them, they get to your dog, then all of a sudden there's an incident where your dog does react, or maybe your dog bites them or bites their dog or something like that. Now that's going to be worse for you because, number one, it's completely defeating everything you've been working towards. Your dog has practiced a behavior that's not good for them. If you're able to correct them and stop them from that behavior, that is going to help you a little bit because you're stopping the behavior, but they also already initiated the reactivity. But now the person that this altercation just happened with, maybe there's vet bills. Maybe your dog got their dog and now there's vet bills, or maybe their dog has major damages, or maybe there's some other kind of lawsuit or something like that, so you got to think about that as well. You're protecting your dog. You're protecting your dog's behavior. You're building up your dog's behavior. You're protecting yourself. You know what I'm saying? So it's going to be better for you to be assertive and not let certain things happen when you know it's not good for you or your dog, versus trying to be nice and letting a potential bad situation happen because you didn't want to tell someone to get away from you and your dog, or help them get away from you or your dog, or tell them not to pet your dog, stuff like that.
Yep. Just be assertive, because it's just like in sports. They don't see the initial scenario; they see the reaction, and that's when all the stuff starts happening. So from a safety aspect, definitely, you want to preserve your dog.
Yeah. All right. Last special case we're going to discuss for challenging dogs is going to be the dog that has extreme anxiety, or like a kennel anxiety, right? So we talked about the insecure dog. This dog's nervous. This dog's scared. The extremely anxious dog, often is making noises, often can't sit still. Like an insecure dog will be sitting still a lot. They'll be sitting in a certain area. Unless something breaches their boundary, then they'll kind of move. The anxious dog is moving around. Maybe it's biting things, chewing things. If you put it into a kennel, it's freaking out. It's ripping the kennel apart. It's busting out of the kennel. It's drooling everywhere. It depends on the dog as to what that's going to look like. So in these cases, overall, teaching the dog to have self-control, teaching the dog stability in certain positions, and generalizing that's going to be your focus as you work through the training progression. Again, developing a hunger drive, a food drive, and engagement is going to be your first priority, because a lot of times an anxious dog struggles to pay attention, right? You might have them out trying to work with them, and they'll take a piece of food from you, then they're like running around screaming, looking at things that are going on around you, drooling like crazy, having diarrhea everywhere because the anxiety is just riddling them like crazy. You know what I'm saying? So again, developing that hunger drive, developing that food drive and engagement is going to help you. But once you work through the training progression and you've got the obedience behaviors down, you've got the accountability down, now your focus is going to be self-control work and stability work, right? So self-control is like doing a downstay and the dog learning just to stay there, not get up. Teaching that dog to be bored, very difficult for an anxious dog. Stability in positions. If you have that dog sit, they're anxious. They can't sit there. They got to get up and move, right? So that dog just has to learn to bring everything down, calm down. A lot of times your down stay is going to be your go-to because the down is a calming position once they get there, once they learn that, right? And it's going to be more of a submissive position. So teaching stability and self-control work, extended duration down stays, extended duration spot or place commands is going to be beneficial, and then generalizing all that in as many places as possible. With the kennel, lots of exercise. The kennel has to be a resting place. So if you have a dog that's struggling with the kennel, right, wanting to rip apart the kennel, something like that, exercise, wearing that dog out and then putting them in the kennel to rest. The kennel is a resting place. That's going to be your key to success with that. Playing games with the kennel where they're going in and out, you're rewarding them for being in there, stuff like that. That's going to be beneficial as well. But usually when you're dealing with an extreme anxiety dog, the first couple days are going to be a struggle. You're going to constantly be having to manage the dog, pay attention to the dog, especially if you're dealing with the kennel anxiety as well. Constantly working to exercise that dog. Use a bike, walk, run, whatever you got to do. Use a treadmill, because you need that kennel to be a resting place so that you can get it to be a management tool, and then you can focus on the other stuff, which is a stability and self-control in addition to the engagement. So that's going to be your overall modification to the training progression game plan. But do you guys have any other thoughts on those or input on high anxiety, kennel anxiety?
I mean, consistency, like we've been talking about. I think I see a lot of people like, hey, my dog has kennel anxiety, but you only break it out every now and then. Like, of course they're going to be anxious, because it's a negative experience every time they go in there, right? So like
be an everyday thing.
Every single day they're in. That's where they're eating. That's where they're getting their water. That's where they're sleeping. So they're in there a lot, and we're doing all the other stuff that you're talking about. But it's just a consistent thing that in itself, consistency lowers anxiety. You know what I mean? Routine.
Yeah, routines and rituals.
Oh, here we go.
Friend.
Routines and rituals. Ain't done that in a while.
One thing about insecure, resocialization, anxiety, every case, routines and rituals, right? So if your routine and ritual is, hey, we come out of the kennel, we go potty, we do a session, we go back to the kennel while I do other stuff, then we come out of the kennel, we go potty, we do a session, we go back. If that's your routine, if that's your ritual, the dog begins to understand, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we're doing throughout the day, right? You throw some exercise in there, that dog relies upon that routine and ritual, and then you can use that as a stepping stone into the rehabilitation and behavior modification for the other issues, whether that be insecurity, reactivity, anxiety, whatever it is, right? So those routines and rituals, extremely important. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, on the human, like from the human side, think about like public speaking. Most people don't like public speaking. There's some level of anxiety associated with it, right? And then the more you do it, the easier it becomes, the calmer you are, and the more you're able to fluidly speak to people in public. It's the same stuff that we're doing here.
Oh, yeah. Good to go. All right, so let's go into a couple case studies. Again, we've covered the basics. We've covered our dog training philosophy. We've covered our ideal training progression. We've talked about some modifications we might need to make for a dog that won't take food, a highly insecure dog, highly reactive dog, extreme anxiety dog, right? Again, everything's basically the same, right? You're going to follow the same ideal training progression. You're just going to modify a couple steps here and there based on whatever dog's in front of you. Once that dog's on track with that, then you're going to continue to progress, right? So just keep in mind, a dog is a dog, right? They're going to operate the same way. They're just individuals, so you have to modify little things here and there to meet their specific needs, and then you get them on the train. You know what I'm saying? Raise my mic up. Having an issue hearing me? A little bit. Holy cow. First time.
That's not been a complaint ever, that we couldn't hear Chad.
So the first case study we'll talk about is a dog extreme insecurity case. So extreme that when I went to pick him up, I put a training collar on him. We use a First Saver training collar and a leash. I had the owners do that, trying to take him out to my truck. Dogs, thrashing, biting, all that kind of stuff. He's biting the training collar so bad that, his mouth's bleeding, all that kind of stuff. Now, again, you're going to be consistent. If this is happening, yes, you do need to understand that, hey, if this dog damages, tore his cheek open or something like that, that's going to be a cause for concern. I have to keep that disinfected, right? But you can't just stop what you're doing and say, oh my gosh, he's bleeding, we still got to get him going. If he learns that thrashing and snapping and biting is going to prevent him from doing something that he's uncomfortable with, then he'll always do that. He'll get worse. You know what I'm saying? So,
especially too if you have not proper equipment, right? Like a slip lead or some kind of nylon leash, you chews right through it.
Bad day. Gone.
Bad day.
Insecure dog's going to run and they're going to be gone. So anyway, got him set up. Safety is a important factor. So what I did is because of the leash thing you just mentioned, I was concerned that he might chew through a leash. So I had a setup with him where I had training collar on him. I had a regular leather leash that we use. Then I had a wire connected to him, a steel cable to the training collar as well. That way if he chewed through the leash, I still had a secondary control on him. And I basically had another leash that would wrap around my body, and I would connect the wire to that. That way, if he chewed through the leather leash because he got scared or whatever, I was still able to maintain control of him instead of him going insecure on me and running, and now it's a whole ordeal. You know what I'm saying? So did that, focused on routines and rituals. So once I got him to our place where we're doing the training, taking him out to go potty, showing him the potty area, showing him the walking areas. This dog wasn't like a terrible leash puller, but he would get scared and try to dart off to the side. So he'd just dart off to the side. There'd be some tension on the leash and he would come close to me, right? He wasn't going out of his way to bite me, but if I got too close to him, tried to touch him or anything like that, he would snap, because he didn't want any type of interaction, didn't want food or anything like that. So first couple days, I'm offering him food from my hand every time we go out, doing the same routine, taking him out to go potty, taking him on a short walk, bringing him back to his kennel. After about 3 days of that, he started taking food from me, and then I was able to start accomplishing the ideal training progression. And every time we progressed and we had to change a scenario up, I had to take it really slow with him and make sure the routine and ritual was there. So for example, when we get to the point of the training progression where we're putting the remote collar on, just getting him used to wearing it to desensitize him to that collar, that's a big deal for an insecure dog. Like, he was okay with me petting him at that point, but putting a collar around his neck, a new collar, that was a big deal to him. So of course he's, on edge, potential to snap. So I take my time. He's taking food from me, so I just get him used to putting the collar on, taking it off, rewarding, putting the collar on, rewarding, taking it off, rewarding, right? If he ever stopped taking food, I just take him for a walk, because that's a bonding process. We already have a relationship established, and I progress with that until he's comfortable with the collar. Then now it's taking him out to new places. Holy cow, freaks him out. You know what I'm saying? I still got my safety line on him, because even now that we have this relationship established, if, a surprise trash can shows up and he gets scared and he tries to bite, and let's say he bites through the leather leash, I still have my safety net on him, that wire. So did that, built him up to all scenarios, all environments, all situations like we talked about in the insecure dog section. Lots of socialization, re-socialization. We extended his training at one point to get more in. And, he's at home. He's doing a great job. His owners have done a great job maintaining that. So, just an example of an insecure dog that we did what we described in our modified training progression for the insecure dog, and it was successful, right? And continues to be successful. So just a quick case study on that. Not too many variables different than what we already talked about. But again, with some dogs, there are going to be some variables that we didn't necessarily cover. You kind of got to, have a brainstorming session about, understand canine learning theory, and say, well, let me try this for a couple of days. Okay, that did work, so let me continue to progress. You know what I'm saying? Kevin, I want you to talk us through a case study for a dog that you did, which was pretty reactive, but if I'm not mistaken, a little bit insecure at the same time. Mm-hmm. Was that what was going on?
Yep.
So go through the case study with that one.
So I had a dog. He was in the longest program we offer outside of a custom program. Extremely reactive. His reinforcement history prior to coming to training, he was only 6 months old coming to training, and he had already successfully eliminated another dog.
You killed the dog.
Killed it, yeah. Be so blunt. So he killed the dog, and so when he came into training, he's pretty reactive. First is kind of selective. It's at this core, he's super, super insecure. So dogs that were more insecure to him, that he felt empowered around, he would go over the top, reactive, dominant behavior, trying to charge through their kennel to get to them, things of that nature. And first starting out, building a relationship and things like that, this is very difficult. It's difficult to get them in and out of the kennel. People who are handling them they're uncomfortable. This is a big dog. He's doing these things. But at the core, it was establishing the relationship. Thankfully, he was extremely food motivated from the start. So establishing that engagement, going through my regular progression, right, good to go. Okay, so we get to the point to where I can implement accountability, right? So I'm trying to correct the behavior. It makes the behavior worse. Right, the correction is just stemming him up, whether it was a low level or a higher level. As I increase to try to help him overcome it and effectively communicate to him that what he's doing is incorrect, it was just solidifying the reactive behavior. So at this point, this is where we talk about changing the game up, kind of going back and revisiting some things. Eye contact became extremely important. Building up things with him and trusting the process became important. So like we talked about with the insecure dogs, being consistent. You don't think things are working and you're weeks and weeks in, you still have to stick with it because you are going to see that change. So from my standpoint, I had to put myself in check over that because I was like, this isn't working, let me change it up. Well, let me do this differently. And then I realized, all right, I'm trying too many things at once. Let's focus on one thing and go from there. And that was relationship and eye contact. So eventually got to the point to, I'm walking in past these dogs. I could divert his attention to me very quickly. So it wasn't even like a correction thing. It was like, hey, let's just focus on me, be more concerned with what I'm doing. Then obviously going out and doing distraction work is a challenge, a lot of variables at play, so I set myself up for success with that. Like Chad changed it up, had the leash and had the wires with his dog. I put a muzzle on mine just in case the worst possible scenario would happen. He would not be able to do a lot of effective damage before I could get him under control or get him out of that scenario. So set myself up for success, build repetitions from there. Again, doing engagement in distraction environments. You could tell, you start to read these dogs. You could tell when he was about to react, and I could grab his attention and bring it to me. Start rewarding or just started conditioning an actual look command. So that I could get him just focused on me instead of what's going around. And it eventually got to the point to where I could deploy a correction if needed, and it would snap him out of it. So we were making a lot of good progress with that. He went to a different family than what he came in with. And as far as I know, they're doing well. We had a couple of follow-ups. He's had no issue. It's just him and this dog living in the home. He's following through with what he feels is right, so good to go on that front. But definitely a extremely hard case. One of the tougher dogs I've trained, not just from learning obedience. He was good to go on obedience. He was sharp, he caught on quick. But from overcoming that one particular thing, we really had to pull out all the stops. I had to get some counseling from the table to try to get some new ideas and to overcoming it. But overall, we did pretty well.
One thing you mentioned I like is minimizing risk. So you used a muzzle. So if you guys are at home and maybe you're concerned about your dog's reactivity or something, minimize your risk, use a muzzle. First, you need to condition your dog to the muzzle so that it's a positive experience, so then don't just throw it on them. But like one of the muzzles that Kevin was using was a wire basket muzzle, which has enough room in there to where you can still feed him food. You can put food through that muzzle, but if he does react and you're struggling to maintain control, he's not able to actually get a hold of anything. You know what I'm saying? So it just helps you to minimize risk, and it will help people maintain a distance from you if you're like struggling to be assertive with people and say, hey, stay away from my dog. Like the muzzle itself, just being on your dog will help people maintain a barrier from you. Or you could put a harness on them that says do not pet, do not approach, in big blocky letters that will help keep people away without you having to say something to every single person that's around you.
Muzzle is very effective. I've never had a dog in a muzzle and people are like, hey, can I pet that dog?
Yeah.
In the vest, they'll do it. They'll be like, oh, I see it says do not pet. Like, while they're
But that doesn't mean me, right? I can still pet, right?
But just having those deterrents in place, because if something does happen too, that could help you out. You'd be like, man, I had this vest on, I had this muzzle on, this person still was not, listening to my professional advice at, staying back, and now this and this happened. So, CYA, man.
Yeah. Another case study, hyperactive dog. right? And hyperactive is a dog that is along the lines of extreme anxiety. They struggle to focus on things. They struggle to, maintain things that they're supposed to be maintaining. So this dog, she was a smaller dog, came in hyperactive, was a little bit reactive. So we go through, but very food motivated, so that we didn't have to build up any food drive or anything. The struggle with her was stability in positions. So again, focusing on down stays, focusing on sit stays, focusing on heeling in proper position, right? So that means reinforcing what you want and then holding her accountable for stepping outside of line. You know what I'm saying? Lots of distraction work or generalization work where you're exposing her to different scenarios, different things going on, making sure that stability in position can be maintained to reduce the hyperactivity and the anxieties. And the eye contact, right? The eye contact is going to be, it's like beautiful whenever it falls into place and it clicks, you know what I'm saying? So that's what we did with her. We basically covered everything today that we modified with her. But once she left training and went home, right, those associations with the owner were a little bit different, right? So she's giving the owner a hard time. So having the owner focus on eye contact, having the owner focus on prevention of escalation in her mentally. So let's say she's, in a downstay, there's another dog walking by, she's staring at it. That stare could turn into a reaction, right? She could be escalating in her mind. We want to prevent that. So how do we prevent that? We refocus her on eye contact or looking at us instead of looking at that dog, right? So learning to do that, learning those cues that Kevin talked about with the dog he was working with as well, and then turning that into eye contact like we talked about, having that eye contact become the go-to behavior when the dog is in conflict, and the dog naturally doing that on their own without being asked to do that every single time is going to be a big time key to success. And it's successful. You got to be consistent with it. You got to be 100% on board with it, right? And if you do that, if you're consistent and you're constantly building that up, it becomes something you don't even think about, and your dog just does, right? Like recently, we took a trip out to a very busy it's called Second Sunday on King Street, right? Downtown Charleston, South Carolina. They shut down a section of downtown where it's all pedestrians. Had some dogs out there that used to be reactive, and these dogs are just laser locked on me because I was the handler for one of these dogs. Laser locked on me, even though I'm not paying attention to them. I'm talking to people around me, and that's because of the amount of time and effort and work and years of consistency that I've put into helping those dogs have good eye contact, make good decisions, right? And know what to do. If they don't know what to do, it's just look at me. You know what I'm saying? Are there any other case studies that come to mind with you guys that you guys have worked with that we haven't really discussed that maybe some other modified steps of the training progression would help?
I had one that came to us from a rescue. As far as the progression stuff, I knew, so basically this dog would just get reactive. He had a bite history. He lit up several people. He was rescued by this rescue. It was with a foster. Then they sent them to us to figure out, why is he biting people? From everything I saw, he was a pretty confident dog. But all the stuff they're describing is telling me insecurity, and so I picked up the dog. The dog immediately comes at me. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. But he jumps up on me in a very friendly way. I'm like, oh, cool. All right, we're good to go. Put a slip lead on him. Good to go. Went to go take the owner's slip lead off, and he goes, boom, goes right for me, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. And so, come to find out, this dog was found wearing, a bark collar. And so some kind of trauma associated there, so causing some insecurity associated with his neck. So, that is obviously going to be a potential issue as far as, hey, we got to adopt this dog out. We want to find a home for him. Nobody can touch his neck. Nobody can get a collar on. These are big deals for a dog because we got to have a leash on the dog. We with our progression, we're going to use a remote collar at some point. Based on the dog's temperament, he was day one food motivated, good to go. So I was confident that the training progression was going to resolve the issue. The issue that I was foreseeing was this dog does not, it's not like our standard client that hires us to train their dog and goes back to them. This dog has to go to a potential foster, maybe an adopter, somebody that's never met this dog. So very much so, this is going to be about the relationship, right? So this is not us doing a training progression and then we just, hey, here's our foster. Just do this. If he reacts at you, correct him, right? Well, like, these people aren't going to be able, even after the training, they're not even going to be able to get a collar on this dog because they have to build the relationship. So these were all the things that I was foreseeing when we started the training. So things like using a muzzle, I knew that was going to have to be a must. Like, I've got to get this dog good with a muzzle. So we were throwing that because he's food motivated. I was using that with engagement a lot. So, like, to the point where I just hold the muzzle out, this dog will just go and stick his head in the muzzle, and we'll let you put the muzzle on to the dog. The muzzle was a fun thing. It's a great association. And I wanted it at that high level so that a complete stranger could hold a muzzle out and he's going to stick his face in that muzzle. And once he's comfortable with that muzzle, we can put the muzzle on. Now we're safe, right? So even if he were to react at us, we have time to work through that, and he's not biting, because this dog has caused like serious damage, bit people in the face, all that kind of stuff. But it's also helping us build trust with this dog. The muzzle's on him. I'm able to put a remote collar on. I can still reward him, right? I can do like what Chad was talking about with the dog he's talking about. Just take it very slow, getting him used to putting these tools on. And then basically, like, at the end of training, we followed all the progression we're talking about. Everything went smoothly, but at the end of training, we had to do things a little bit differently with the foster that he went to, because he ended up going to one foster, then another foster, then finally got adopted. So 3 different homes before he was successfully adopted. So I had to go through this with these people every single time, teaching them how to use all of these tools. So it wasn't like most clients that come to us, the dog goes home, we say, hey, here's all your tools, here's how you use a remote collar, here's how you correct a dog. We weren't even using the remote collar. We're like, hey, this is what you're going to do to hold him accountable. You're going to do a lot of engagement. You're going to get him used to this muzzle, and then we'll meet again next week or in 2 weeks, and then we'll talk about the remote collar. And with each of them, it took probably 2 to 3 weeks before we got to the point of putting on the remote collar, but it's more teaching them how to develop that relationship. And so that was something that was a little bit outside of the box that we don't get a lot. It's like, man, I have to think a bunch of steps ahead to get him to successfully transition back from training, because it's not always like people think, hey, send the dog to training, he's good to go. Now we don't have to worry about nothing. Like, no, there's these other things like management and structure and building the relationship, engagement, doing all these things that you're going to have to do. And then when he goes to another house, even though the behaviors have been super, super strong, we're going to go back to the beginning and do the same exact thing over and over. So that was a little bit challenging, just because of the extra time that you have to put into that kind of stuff. But again, the progression worked. You know what I mean? We just focused on the progression, did it a little bit differently. That's all.
That's where you have to be blunt too.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I know, when I took mine home, I was basically like, this, and this is part of the progression. If you don't do this, you're going to fail. Yeah. Just to be, there's no point sugarcoating it, because this is a special
Sometimes
dog.
It's point blank, like, hey, right, if you don't do this, you're going to get bit in the face.
Yeah.
You're going to get attacked.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for the dog.
But that's the conception too, because like, this dog came in, they undersold it, because I initially was the point of contact. So they kind of undersold the issues, and then, of course, called me when he killed the dog. So already when they're talking about that, and we're moving his training date up, I'm letting them know right then and there, he's going to come into training. It's not going to be automatic. It's not going to fix it. So I'm trying to prepare them as much as possible and just get that thought out of their head, and then just kind of working through them with those special protocols.
So in the end, no matter what case you're dealing with, whether it's insecurity, whether it's high levels of reaction, extreme anxiety, bad associations like Chris was talking about, to messing with his neck, it's a dog, we got to put a collar on his neck. So we got to change that association over time. Relationship's going to be, your friend. Engagement's going to be your friend. Eye contact's going to be your friend. Routine and ritual going to be your friend. You know what I'm saying? These are all things that are going to be foundational to continuing that training progression. And then you do have to know that long term you got to maintain these things. Now, the more consistent you are, the longer that you're doing this stuff, the less maintenance is required, you know what I'm saying, as you go long term with these kind of dogs. But at first it's going to be more work, initially. And with that being said, if you're working with your dog at home, don't put a timeline on yourself. Take your time. Kind of just, if you're listening to this, try to go back, listen to it again, write down the progression on a sheet of paper. Understand the different steps. Call us or hit us up if you want, that written out. But, like write down the steps to that progression and then truly understand, if I go from step 1 to step 2, what is the criteria that I'm looking for to actually go to step 2? You know what I'm saying? You need solid eye contact, for example. You need engagement. All right, check that off. Now I can go to step 2. Right? If I'm struggling in step 2 because I can't get, luring, for example, if my dog won't lure, what are some troubleshooting steps that I need to be thinking about? You know what I'm saying? So having that in your brain, going through it that way, that can be a benefit to you, But take your time with it. Don't rush it. A lot of people, especially in today's world, we have a really bad habit of wanting things now, getting bored with things, right? This is something that you can't rush. It's not something that you can get bored with. You just got to take your time, enjoy the process, enjoy the time spent with your dog. You know what I'm saying? You're going to probably have to change up what you're used to doing. Maybe you're used to taking a walk with your dog every single day. Your dog's pulling the crap out of you. Your arm's coming out of the socket. That's got to change. So you got to stop doing that for a while. And then your walks in the future are going to be a loose leash walk. You know what I'm saying? So just keep those in the front of your mind as you're working with your dog. Don't rush it. Trust the process. Let the progression go. Let yourself just kind of follow the progression as you're going with it. You know what I'm saying? And with that being said, just want to mention real quick, thank you guys for tuning in today. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, please let us know. You can call us. You can email us. You can text us. You can social media us. Pack Talk Podcast is sponsored by Canine Revolution Dog Training. So if you guys need help with your dog, whether you're in South Carolina, whether you're in Florida, whether you're in Maine, whether you're in California, we can help you. If you're at a distance from us and you want to get your dog into one of our programs, all we have to do is work out the transportation piece, which we've worked out with plenty of people. We've worked with transportation services. People have driven here to drop off dogs, pick up dogs. We've had people fly dogs here, whatever, so we can work those details out with you guys. But reach out to us. We'd be honored to work with you and help you achieve your goals with your dog. Pack Talk Podcast is also sponsored by Canine Revolution Apparel. So if you want to get some stuff to help support the podcast, go to Amazon and the links below. Grab you a Good to Go shirt. Grab you a Good to Go hoodie so you can be good to go, right? And so you can continue to get after it with your Canine Revolution Apparel. New designs coming out soon. Did you get a read ahead on the designs?
I heard some rumors.
You can't release details. New designs.
Let's just say I was walking by and I observed some things.
New designs coming soon. You guys might want to check those out. And then last but not least, we like to support America. If you want to support America, you can go to originmaine.com, Jocko Fuel.
Origin USA now,
Origin
right?
USA, right? Origin USA is providing products that are sourced in America, made in America by Americans, right?
Not Americans.
We don't want to support countries that are using slave labor.
China.
If you go to Walmart, you buy you a pair of jeans, guess what?
China.
You're supporting slave labor, child slaves, right? If you go to Target, you buy you a pair of jeans, you're supporting slave labor, right? But if you go to Origin USA and you buy you a pair of Delta 68s, you're supporting American farmers, because every material in Origin products is sourced in America, and then Americans are making it and they're shipping it out to you, right? With blood.
They also happen to be very comfortable. Most comfortable pair of jeans I've ever had.
Well, Chris is doing his jiu-jitsu in the Origin jeans, Delta 68s. We show up to jiu-jitsu class like last week. Chris shows up in his jeans. I'm like, I understand.
Hey, they said you can roll in them.
I understand.
I said, we'll see about that. And guess what? You can.
And you were able to choke me out, so good to go.
Well, I don't know
so
about that.
You guys can support America like we are. You can also go to Jocko Fuel and get you some Jocko Go energy drinks. You can get you some Jocko white tea. You can get you some Jocko greens, which if you don't like vegetables like me, but you still want the micronutrients that vegetables provide, you can get you a Jocko greens. Throw a scoop of that into your milk, your Jocko milkshake for the day, then you're good to go.
This dude's going to sue you once the TikTok commenters get a hold of this. Start trashing his product.
So anyway, if you want to support America, if you want to support yourself, go to Origin USA, OriginMain.com, Jocko Fuel. You can use code SINGER101 for 10% off and be good to go, right?
I wonder if that's going to flag one day. It's like, how so many people have Singer 101?
Hey, I'm helping you guys out,
Hey,
you know.
not
But anyway,
multiplying.
thank you
I've
guys
used
for
it.
listening. Thank you for your support. If you do want to hear a particular topic in the future, let us know. If you want to see a video on a particular topic, let us know. We like the comments. We like the feedback because we're using these to help put out more content in the future that you guys are looking for, right? And if you like our podcast, if you like what we're saying, please go to your favorite podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star review. That does help us out. Helps us to know that you guys like what we're putting out, okay? And until next time, we've got Chris, Lexy, Kevin, and me, and Ben off to the side today. No Mike. No Mike today. And he did shave his mustache.
Don't like it.
His girlfriend said she couldn't find his lips. She couldn't kiss him. She couldn't find his lips. Got to cut the mustache.
It'll grow back.
So anyway, thank you guys for listening, and until next time, out.